He paused and scrutinized me still closer. Look, don't I know you from somewhere? The same notion had been nagging at me as well, but before I could respond, we heard Timothy's voice at the other end of the stables. Summer lime pie. My new friend and I both asked, What? Timothy joined us and spoke to the man. Tulip Festival at the Palace a month ago. Summer lime pie. Richard opened his mouth and then looked back at me. That's right. I saw you at the Palace Gardens with Timothy's sister. You were wearing a green dress with a white hat. Wait, you two know each other, I asked, and what's this about summer lime pie? This is Richard Blunt, Timothy said. He works at my office and he's coming with us. And when he saw you last month, he said you looked like summer lime pie. He said Marissa looked like strawberry shortcake. While I was trying to work out in my mind if I was flattered or not, Richard was already having a concerned conversation with Timothy. In a low voice that I wasn't supposed to hear, Richard said, What do you mean coming with us? Timothy didn't bother to lower his voice. This is Lisbette Blackwood, and she's coming along. He opened a stall and walked inside. Richard's eyes went wide. But why? You never even mentioned this girl before. Has something changed? I frowned. There was nothing flirtatious about the tone of Richard's voice anymore, and I much preferred his flirting side to the one which referred to me as this girl. Piqued, I said, I'm not going to slow you down. I'll even help deliver the package if you need me to. Timothy fairly jumped out of the stall. You told her? He asked Richard. I didn't tell her anything, Richard snapped back. I only said I was delivering something. Who else have you told? Timothy demanded. No one. I just got here an hour ago, but you still haven't answered my question. Why is she here? Timothy went back into the stall. Ask her if you want to know. He came out leading a young chestnut mare and started walking her up and down. I turned to Richard. I wasn't sure I liked him yet, handsome as he was, but I was bound and determined that he was going to like me. I needed help, I said with a little shrug that was calculated to draw sympathy. Timothy and I are both from the village of Easton, and he's kindly agreed to take me home since I have urgent family business. Richard looked blankly at me. If I was drawing sympathy, he wasn't showing it yet. Instead, he turned to Timothy. Seriously, you're being charitable at a time like this? Timothy was examining the horse's fetlocks. We have a family contract. Oh, Richard said, then his eyebrows knit together. What kind of a contract? The worst kind. It took him a moment, but the truth finally dawned upon Richard. He began to chuckle deep in his throat. Not really. Really? You're betrothed? All this time and you never said one word about it? What about Caroline and Natalie? Did they know? Oh, and Heather, did you tell her? And you couldn't have told Heidi. I mean, can you imagine if Heidi knew you were betrothed? He made an exploding sound with his mouth and raised his hands high over his head. Timothy straightened and said, It's almost expired. 1 week tomorrow, I added. The amusement was leaving Richard's face. Well, if it expires, he said, then why is she here? I mean, this is not exactly a pleasure ride through the woods we're taking. Because it hasn't expired yet. Get it? She called the RCD. They would have suspended my charter, and I wouldn't have been able to get through the checkpoint. What was I supposed to do? Richard looked back at me with an expression of both respect and disapproval. Oh, you are cruel. Cruel? Me, I asked. Do I look cruel? He narrowed his eyes. No, but looks can be deceiving. I remember seeing you at the Tulip Festival now. I said you had that straw fedora and striped vest, didn't you? In a careful voice he said, That's right. I remember because I thought you wore it so well. I saw it immediately in the way he grinned that it had worked. I might not have been in Richard's plans before, but he was definitely warming up to me. Of course, in this case, the flattery was true. Richard's athletic frame would make anything look good. Timothy, my friend, you are one smart man to let that contract expire, he said. This one's pure trouble. I smiled. Timothy grumbled something, but I didn't catch what he said. And we are absolutely leaving her behind, Richard added. Deeply offended, I drew myself up to my full height. No, you're not. You're past the checkpoint now, Timothy, he said. There's no one to make you take her with us anymore. Richard was right. There was nothing to force Timothy to take me with him now that he was safe across the border. I waited for Timothy to answer, but he didn't. I hurried over to him. You aren't going to leave me, are you? He scowled down at me. Do you really think I'd leave you in a place like this? Richard started talking fast. But we can't risk it. Besides, she'll never be able to keep up. She'll keep up, Timothy said. Then to me he said, You should take this one. She's got a bit of a kick to her gait, but I think she'll settle down before too long. Does she even know how to ride? Richard demanded. At once I regretted using my helpless maiden strategy. I began to explain, but Timothy beat me to it. Of course she can ride. She was raised in Easton, wasn't she? Narrowing his eyes at me, Richard said, I thought you were from Ottleton. I giggled. I am when I'm going to school. And apparently you do know about horses. Well, Timothy gave a derisive laugh. She knows everything about horses. I watched as Richard's nostrils dilated. All right, Timothy, if you really insist on taking her, I suppose I don't have much choice. But if she slows us down, then I'm going on without both of you. You might be willing to play games here, but I am not. Carson emerged long enough to take our money and help saddle the horses. He also traded a set of saddlebags to me for my Western luggage. As for my horse, Timothy was right. The mare was fidgety, but only because she was eager and wanted exercise. In that way, she was like me. I'd been cooped up in the city for long enough, and it was with a thrill of excitement that I followed Timothy and Richard out of town and into the forest. The day was getting late, but that made me all the more eager to get as much riding in as we could before nightfall. Above us was an overcast sky. There was a certain prickliness in the air stemming from the heady determination of a well-progressing spring. The pastels of Audleton were little more than a memory here in the mountains where the colors were dark and deep. Even the occasional primroses, yellow and fair, were painted in darker hues here. The greens that had looked so lush only an hour ago were turning black in the shadows of the towering trees. Winter may have gone, but a lingering damp chill from previous snows remained. It stung my cheeks in a way that made me want to gallop. With the town behind us, we still saw the cottage now and then, but there was no doubt that we had left the thralls of civilization. The road was lonely, muted, and exposed to watching eyes. This was the infamous pass that I had heard about all my life, and though I had yet to see my first robber, I had no doubt that 100 men could be spying on us right now, and we'd never know it for the darkness. And while the threat of danger was intriguing, I could not deny that I was grateful that Richard had joined us. When push came to shove, I really did prefer to stop at an inn tonight, hopefully one with dry sheets, than to be captured by ruffians. 3 wasn't much more than 2, but it added to our general traveler's insurance. The 2 of them rode in front of me, holding some secret conversation. Richard still hadn't forgiven me for coming, because every few minutes he'd glance back at me with a frown. I wasn't bothered. I was determined in my own time to make Richard like me. I had no doubt of succeeding when I was ready to set my mind to it. For now, however, I was too preoccupied with the thought of all the robbers hiding around us to worry about turning on the charm. I'd read books about robbers and kidnappers. If novels were to be believed, this species of humanity were dark horsemen who roamed the shadows, desperate men, each with bared teeth, quivers stuffed with arrows, and a dozen hidden knives. Their saddlebags were inevitably bulging with coins and jewels. I paused my terrors for a moment at the thought of those bulging saddlebags. In fact, I was distracted for quite some time as I wondered what I might do should I come across such items abandoned on the road. But as that occurrence was unlikely to happen to someone with my luck, my mind again returned to those hidden knives and quivers of arrows. The colder and darker it became, the more I felt that encountering such things would be far more inconvenient than educational. Timothy and Richard were also growing more watchful. They no longer spoke to each other, but kept their eyes on the side of the road where a deep blackness had settled. Somewhere in the woods a wolf cried mournfully for its mate. The sound was too close for comfort. I was startled to hear Richard's voice. "You're a bit of a helpless thing, aren't you?" He was looking back at me. "I think she's shivering with fright, Tim." Timothy looked over his shoulder. "Are you frightened?" His voice was not particularly sympathetic. I shook my head. "Only a bit cold." I'm not sure I was convincing, but it was all right because they both slowed down long enough for me to join them. I felt a secret gloating as I guided my horse between the 2 of them, but I wasn't so foolish as to let it show. "I suppose one of us is going to have to offer her our gloves," Richard said to Timothy. I smiled to myself in the darkness, but I said, "Don't even think about it. I'm just acclimating, that's all. It's been so warm in Audleton these past few weeks that I'm not used to being cold again. I'll harden up quickly, you'll see." "Besides," I said with a sideways glance at Richard's thin jacket, "you don't look all that warm yourself."